Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent. Good morning again, and welcome to What to Expect When You're Expecting to Be a Caregiver, which is being brought to you by UB's Office of Gift Planning. My name is Wendy Irving, and I have the luxury and the privilege of serving as the Assistant Vice President for Gift Planning here at the University. This morning, I'm pleased to welcome Mindy, Menke, and Angela Hall. Mindy and Angela will dive into a number of important financial and legal topics as they relate to caregiving. Mindy is an attorney with Damon, Morey, attorneys at law, who represents clients on a broad range of personal and family planning matters. Much of Mindy's practice focuses on estate and trust planning, elder law, and asset protection. Mindy is a product of SUNY Buffalo Law School, one of the best in the country, where she graduated cum laude in 2006. Angela Hall is a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley. Angela works with individual, professionals, and business owners in developing and implementing financial plans. Angela has an undergraduate degree from Fredonia and an MBA with a concentration in finance from Canisius College. I'm sure you'll agree we have two wonderful experts here with us this morning, and that we will all are open to learning from both of you, and we thank you for your time. Everybody, please join me in welcoming Mindy and Angela.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'm not the best morning person, I'll be the first one to tell you. So I brought my own coffee, but it's so great to see so many happy faces this early, and before our polar vortex comes. So get ready, tomorrow it might be a blizzard. You never know here in Buffalo. So we have a topic today, and the title's pretty catchy, so thanks UB for helping us out. We're numbers gals, so marketing might not always be our forte, so they did a really good job. So really today what we're going to go over are, we're going to give you some information, then we're going to give you some background, because there's going to be a lot of terms, there's going to be a lot of regulation things that maybe you've heard in the media, then we're going to go into some case studies. So you're going to see on your table, we handed out just your basic information. So when we go over something, everybody's on the same page. And you know it's tough to do math in your head, especially with big numbers. So we just wanted to make sure that we have everything in front of you in case there's any questions. So really how this is going to work is we'll go over some quick basics. We'll give you some statistics that may make you want to drink more coffee or take a nap. And then Mindy will dive into the nitty-gritty of really what it means, what's estate planning, what's long-term care planning, how's this really going to work when you actually have to do it. And unfortunately, probably something we're all going to have to do at some point. So.
And we're certainly open to questions during the presentation, although if it's kind of off topic, we might ask you to save it till the end, or certainly Angela and I will be hanging around afterwards to answer any questions. If you have something that's sort of a little bit more personal you don't want to share with the group, we will be here for a while. So I guess we will jump right in.
And before we get started, we will say it's really an open forum. You'll find that when we go into case studies, feel free to raise your hand and be like, that happened with my mom, or that happened with my dad, or we're experiencing that right now. So it helps us stay on track, but it also helps us really get your questions and help you get some good information, because that's what we're here for. So our first slide is what is long-term care. So there's a bunch of stuff on here, but long-term care isn't always something that you're going to get later on in life. It's not just dementia. It's not just, oh, you know, somebody fell and broke their hip, now what do we do? It can be an illness, right? Cancer, we hear everybody has been touched by somebody here who has cancer or has had some other disease or illness. That can happen at any stage of your life. So it's really important, and when we talk about this, it's not just for the elderly senior citizens, it's just for good planning. Okay. Risks to your financial future. So, let's ask, what's your biggest fear? What's your fear with your financial future? What could ruin all the money that you saved so hard for? Illness, right? Healthcare. How many of us here have had to have that conversation about the new costs of healthcare? Right? How many of us understand Obamacare? Right? I'm probably not using the right term for that. right, but there's so much out there right now, and it's such a gray area that healthcare and illness can really be something that blows up your financial plan, even if you've worked so hard to get there. Oh, can we go back? Thanks. Outliving our income. How many of us think we have enough income to live the way we want to in retirement? That's the biggest question I get. And I have this gentleman who sends me an email. Kid you not, he goes, "Can I retire now?" And he's like, "You're really good at avoiding the question."
In fairness, I also sent Angela a similar email.
So most of my emails. So really, you know, people, their biggest fear, whether they want to talk about it or not, is outliving their income. And also passing away without being financially prepared. In other words, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you have parents, grandparents who unexpectedly passed away and you are tasked with, oh my God, what do we do now? How do we pay for a funeral? Like, where did she hide that stuff? My grandfather passed away. He was in the Depression era, did not believe in a bank. Well, take that back. He believed in the safe deposit boxes at a bank. Also believed not telling you which safe deposit boxes he used. So, God bless the person that one day drills a box and finds his money, because that's where it's going to be located. So now we're good. Okay, so just some numbers, the fun statistical numbers that we all want to hear. When I started in this business, they used to tell us that if you were a couple, you had a 50% chance that one of you were going to need some sort of care along your life. That number has now gone up to 70. Any ideas why that's gone up?
People are living longer.
Right, we're living longer. Remember when somebody used to have a heart attack, you were kind of like, oh, I'm sorry. You're in the back of your head, you're like, oh, grandma has 10 more years. Now, you're just like, oh, you had a heart attack, get some surgery, we're good to go. Like, so the lifespan of people is so much longer, and with technology and with medical care, it's amazing. People are living 20 more years. My average life expectancy is in my 90s. Like, wow, okay. I hope it's a good 90s, you know?
But the issue is, and I think Angela just alluded to it, people are living longer, but they're not necessarily living better, right? You're living longer, but you're not in good health through all of those years.
Right. And of course, where are we living? The happy thing is most of us, half of us get to live at home, which is great, right? We're getting some sort of assistance coming into the home. Also, the assisted living, community care, you know, we see a lot of those communities now that are popping up, especially here in Western New York. So a good percentage of that is also going to that community care. Good. Oh, here's the fun stats. So, what do we think? Is the average caregiver a male or female?
Female.
So we all need a daughter. I have no kids. I'm definitely afraid. How old do you think that average caregiver is? Any idea?
53.
Yeah, you're right. It's 50.
Really?
Yeah. And she works. So not only is she probably a parent herself, she's working. She lives about 20 minutes from the person she's helping give care to, and she's still young, right? So this is what we're looking at right now, because remember, 50% of those people are still living at home. So this is a good chunk of our community, especially here in Western New York. When we look out too, so the interesting statistics are that 66% of those caregivers are going to have to take a decrease in salary, right? Or they're missing work. It's tough. You know, I spent some time working at the bank, and we had a couple caregivers there, and they were out a lot. Those were the folks that used all their vacation, all of the sick time. And it's not, you can't fault them for it, but when you look at caregiving, that's kind of how it works, right? So we're also looking at this population of women, and then we are also asking them, A, to take care of us, and B, oh, you might have to take a decrease in salary. So it's really, that's why planning can be so important. Ooh, the costs. This is the first slide. Do we think that healthcare goes up at the same as regular inflation? That's a silly question, but it is, right? It goes up 4-6% annually. That's a scary number. So what it costs today is definitely not going to be what it costs when I get there. So I better save a little bit harder because, I'm looking at $1.5 million for the, if I happen to get Alzheimer's. So it's really, and that's not even our healthcare cost. These are just our long-term care costs. So we're not here to scare you. We're not here to really send you running out the door. But we are here to talk about what are some preventative measures that we can take to help protect everything that we've worked so hard for.
And I will say that these are national statistics, right, Angela?
Yes. they
Okay,
are.
so these are national statistics. Like a lot of things in the great state of New York, everything costs more. So a year of long-term care costs, I would say, $20,000 or $30,000 more than the number that's listed right there. Because taxes, everything that makes everything else cost more in New York applies here as well. So just to keep that in mind as well.
If you need coffee, you can run now. All right, we're good. So how do we pay for it? Any ideas? What have we seen? Anything in the crowd? Generally, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have 3 family members that I'm caring for. One has long-term care insurance, and 2 do not. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not a good thing.
Yeah, and we will definitely touch on that, and it's been one of our examples. So it's right, long-term care insurance, is it helping you? Do they have an aide or somebody coming in to help?
They aren't quite at that point yet, but I just don't know, with the facilities out there, if it's really worth the cost.
I will pipe in to say it absolutely is.
Okay.
It absolutely is. From my perspective, and I do a lot of the planning, which we'll get into, but long-term care insurance is really one of the best tools out there to preserve assets for the next generation because it provides a stream of income to help pay for these costs for long-term care. And the reason long-term care insurance is so expensive, and as Angela knows, is because everybody uses it. Because it's be used in the home. If you don't need skilled nursing home care or assisted living even, but you just need a little help around the house, it will pay for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the long-term care really, and there's a variety of ways that you can purchase it, and we can talk about it. It can look like a couple different products, so we can go back to that. But long-term care is going to help you, if you have that daughter, do you want your daughter getting you in and out of the tub every day? Do you want your daughter, or even your son, to be that 66% who had to take a pay cut, and now your grandkids might suffer? With long-term care, it's paid, you've paid into it, you've paid for it. Now somebody is going to, you can have that nurse come to the house. You can get those, if you need to make some changes to your home so that things are more accessible for you, you can make those changes. It's really taking control. You're taking control for yourself. And it does take a while. I will tell you the beginning process is going on claims, stuff like that, the technicalities can be a little daunting. But it's going to be the same, if not worse, if you don't have some sort of planning done for yourself.
Absolutely, and a lot of the policies will even allow, if you have a child who says, I want to be the caregiver, right? And again, a lot of us don't want to put that burden on our children, but the kid says, no one's going to take better care of you than I will, and that's probably the truth. A lot of the policies will actually allow that person to be paid from the long-term care policy to assist you. So, if you have to take that pay cut, you can kind of make up for it in other areas.
Yeah, it like we said, it looks like a variety of different products, and we can talk about that offline. But yes, so long-term care is definitely going to be one way to pay for this long care, and it's also, medical insurance really isn't going to cover it, and that's going to be some stuff that we dive into a little bit deeper. So otherwise, it's coming out of your assets. So everything that you've worked so hard for, now we have to start to pay to make sure that we're well taken care of. And this is just, how does this fit into my plan? So we do a lot of retirement planning. People will spend years on our retirement planning. People spend years on their wedding. Right? Not this girl, but people do.
Angela's recently found out.
Yep. I had a picnic, we had a band.
I was there, it was fantastic.
They didn't kick us out, so that was good. But people plan vacation, that European vacation, right? That maybe you've been married 20 years, you can't wait to take, and then, wow, but we forgot to plan for what if we really get sick. Crap. And usually you realize that when it's a little too late. So this is just kind of how it fits into our puzzle pieces when we are building a solid financial plan. And this is where we're going to transition to Mindy, but this is, when we talk about what things are covered, this is a nice slide. If you walk away with anything today out of this presentation, this gives you a good idea of what is really going to be covered and what's not covered, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. You're up, Mindy.
All right, so to jump right off where Angela left off, we'll talk a little bit about misconceptions. I cannot even count the number of people that come to me, and I'm sure they come to Angela when she's talking about long-term care and long-term care insurance and say, well, it's all right, I've got Medicare, so I'm good, right? But that's not true, okay? So Medicare does not cover skilled nursing home care. What Medicare does cover, because Medicare is a program everybody gets. If you're disabled and you worked enough quarters, so you're getting Social Security disability, or once you've turned 65, you're eligible for Medicare. I can scoot over. Switch this.
We're being filmed.
Here looks good. So everyone's eligible for Medicare once you hit 65 if you've worked enough quarters. Medicare pays for a lot of insurances. There's all the different parts, and that's a whole nother presentation, right? But what it will not pay for is skilled care. It will pay for 100 days of nursing home care if you're getting rehabilitative services. And you've had to spend at least 3 days in a hospital prior to entering the nursing home and be receiving rehab. And in that circumstance, if you fall, you break a hip, go to the hospital, you know, they fix it up. I only know that because my mom has recently done that. She didn't so much fall as get thrown off her horse, but tomato, tomato. They'll pay the full cost for rehab days 1 through 20. And rehab happens in skilled nursing homes. And so I think that's where the confusion comes in. Days 21 through 100, there is a copay. It goes up every year, as everything else does. This year it's $152 a day. Some insurance policies will cover that. If you have insurance through the state of New York, it covers it. It's great. If you don't, it's probably unlikely to cover it. And there's also insurance policies you can get. They're generally referred to as Medigap policies that will cover the cost of that care. But once you hit your 100 days, Medicare is no longer going to pay. Or if you no longer need rehab, if you're fixed, they're not going to pay. If you have some kind of a cognitive issue, if you're being admitted to a nursing home for Alzheimer's, dementia, something like that, they're going to say there's nothing we can do. We can't rehabilitate that, so you're not going to be eligible for Medicare. So, so what we're really talking about is getting somebody eligible for Medicaid. And because the two words sound so similar, people oftentimes interchange them incorrectly. So Medicaid is a means-tested program. It's designed to be a payer of last resort, to say, once you've spent all of your money, then we will start paying, right? Then Medicaid will pick it up, because they don't want you to be destitute. They don't want you to be living in the street. So in order to be eligible for Medicaid, you have to meet certain eligibility requirements. And these change every year as well. But for this year, in order to be eligible for Medicaid, you can't have resources more than $14,550. You can only keep $50 a month of your income, plus the cost of your additional insurances. Everything else has to be contributed towards the cost of your care. There is one exception to this that I will get to momentarily. So this is what happened. My slides got reversed. Let's get past that. If you're a married individual, there's also resource requirements for your spouse. Your spouse can retain between $74,820 and $117,240 worth of resources. They can retain maximum income in the amount of $2,931. And this is where that exception falls. So if you have a spouse who has less than this amount, then that community spouse gets to keep enough of the ill spouse's income to get up to this number. So for example, and I'll apologize now, but in all our examples, we always put the husbands in the nursing home first. Kill the husbands off first, put them in the nursing homes first. I just think it's chivalrous. So if the husband's got income coming in every month of $3,050, and the wife has income of her own of $931. She didn't really work too much, she doesn't have a lot coming in. If he's eligible for Medicaid, when Medicaid budgets him and says how he's going to have to distribute his income, they're going to say, okay, husband, you get to keep your $50, don't spend it all in one place. They're going to say, because the wife only has $931 in my example, she's gonna get to keep $2,000 of her husband's income to get her up to this level. And then that additional $1,000 he's gonna have to pay to the nursing home every month. You know, the issue, as you can imagine, can come in when a family is living on a larger income. All of a sudden, in my example, we've got, you know, $3,000, you know, almost $4,000 a month of income, and then you cut that down to, you know, cut that down by $1,000 a month. That can really hinder people's lifestyles. If they own, the couple owns their primary residence, it's considered exempt as long as the spouse is living there. So they're not, in this circumstance, Medicaid's not going to take the home from her. They're not going to evict the wife or anything like that. The house would be protected in that scenario. And they'll also be able to retain vehicles. So when I'm talking about resources, when I'm talking about that $14,550 or that $174,820, what are we talking about? We're talking about all accounts regardless of how they're titled, which means if it's in the husband and wife's name individually, if it's an individual who has their daughter on the account, right? Because she lives down the road, just in case anything happens, they've got her on the account so she can pay the expenses, has cash for the funeral, what have you. The banking law says you're right, that daughter is a 50% owner of that account. But the issue here is Medicaid rules are not like other rules. As we go through this, you'll realize, yeah, but the IRS says something different. Medicaid says we don't care. We have our own set of rules, and the rules of the IRS or the rules of the banking laws don't apply to us. So in that circumstance, if you've got a mother and a daughter on an account, Medicaid says we assume that account is the mother's unless the daughter can prove she's putting money in there, that some of that money is hers. So just by adding somebody on a joint account isn't giving you any kind of protection from a Medicaid standpoint. Again, all assets, regardless of the married couple, regardless of how they're titled, it's all investment accounts, it's stocks, it's bonds, it's the cash value of life insurance. If the face value of the life insurance has a $1,500 value or greater. It's real property other than your primary residence. So if you have a hunting camp, a vacation property, a house down in Florida, that's not going to be protected, that's not going to be considered exempt. It's going to be considered a resource. So what doesn't count as part of that resource is the principal balance of your IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, any other qualified retirement account, which is good news. Because essentially what Medicaid does is when they're looking at a retirement account, they're going to say, we're going to require you to take your required minimum distributions, okay? But we're only going to count the income every month. We count that stream of income. We're never going to count the principal value. So if somebody has $10,000 in the bank, $200,000 in an IRA, they're eligible for Medicaid because that $200,000 in the IRA doesn't count. Okay? As long as we have beneficiary designations on the IRAs, we haven't designated our estate. We have an actual person that money is going to pass to. Upon the death of the person, the applicant, that money is going to pass free. So we know we have the IRAs protected. What we oftentimes run into is people want to pull money out of the IRAs first when they have a long-term care cost because the income tax is going to be offset by the medical costs. So from an income tax standpoint, it is a good idea. However, from a asset protection standpoint, it's not a great idea. Prepaid funeral arrangements are also exempt if they're irrevocable. As part of really any Medicaid plan, we make sure we put these prepaid burials into place because that is the one thing I can guarantee to everybody that we will all need, right? We will all need that funeral. And they're expensive. If anyone has done them recently, you can't get out of there very cheaply. So we can set that money aside and it won't be counted.
Plan your own party.
Exactly. If you have life insurance with a face value of $1,500 or less, the cash value doesn't matter. That policy is going to be exempt. And your primary residence would be considered exempt as long as you have a spouse living in the house, a disabled child living in the house, or a child under the age of 21, which in our Medicaid plan doesn't come up all that often. I've had it come up, but it's rare. Okay? But what happens if somebody has a house, for example, $10,000 in the bank, they're in a nursing home, they apply for Medicaid. Medicaid's going to say, yes, we are going to give you Medicaid, you're eligible. But because you have this house, and because you're not living in it, and you don't have any of these people we just mentioned living there, we're going to put a lien on your house for however much we pay out for your care. And now Medicaid pays for long-term care much less than private pay individuals do. If you as a private individual are paying $10,000 a month, Medicaid's only paying $7,500 a month. So you get a little savings there, but again, a year and a half in a nursing home can eat down the equity value of almost anybody's house. Upon that person's death, when the house is sold, Medicaid is paid their share first, and then whatever left goes to the beneficiaries. So this is regarding the IRAs and Medicaid. We kind of already covered this, so I'll skip over it. So a couple of the other Medicaid rules, and these are the rules that I find most, and I think Angela would agree, there's the most confusion about, there's the most misinformation.
Going back to that on the house, you said I think the primary residence, if the spouse lives there and one spouse is in a nursing home. Could you go over the lien aspect? In other words, what I'm thinking of is after the individual in the nursing home dies, now, and maybe they then sell the house, is the estate subject to reimbursing from the sale of the house?
Well, that's a very good question. So essentially, if you have a husband and wife, husband's in the nursing home, wife's living in the house, and he has $10,000 in the bank, he's eligible for Medicaid. Medicaid is not going to put a lien on the house because the wife's living there. Because she's living there, it's considered exempt as a resource. So typically in that circumstance, what we do is deed the house from husband and wife, which is oftentimes how it's owned, to the wife's name alone. The husband's death, wife still lives there, Medicaid doesn't get to come and take the house at that point. Now again, if wife someday needs her own care, then we run into the issue. But if there's a husband and wife, that house would be protected in that circumstance. Okay, the issue becomes though, what if the wife dies when the husband's in the nursing home? A lot of people's wills say, married couples often say everything to my husband. So if she has the house in her own name, her will says everything to her husband, then it goes back to him and then we're back in trouble. And those are certainly things that can be planned around, but I don't try to rely on that from an advanced planning standpoint as a way to protect the house, because we don't know, we can't see the future, right? We don't know who's going to go in the nursing home when, who's going to survive them, who won't. But in your example, absolutely. If the wife's living there, the house is protected, there is no Medicaid lien. Okay, question?
What about, in my parents' case, they're both living in their own home, plus my brother lives with them?
That is an exception, and I'm going to get to it in a couple slides, okay?
Thank you.
So we want to talk a little bit about the look-back period and the penalty period. So the look-back period right now is 60 months. And what the look-back period is, it's a period of time where you have to provide records to the Department of Social Services to say, this is everything I've got, okay? This is all my finances. It's bank statements, it's canceled checks, tax returns, it's investment statements. Because what they're going to do is they're going to go through all of those 60 months worth of records to see, did you make any gifts to qualify for Medicaid? Because what they don't want people doing is saying, I've got money, I'm going to give it all away, and then now the state and federal government are going to pay for my care. That's not the intent of the program, so they want to keep people from doing that. So again, it's really a detailed financial analysis. So when I'm applying for Medicaid on someone's behalf, I have to get all of those records. I have to get all of the Morgan Stanley investment statements. I have to get records of closed accounts that were closed during that 5-year look back. I have to get copies of the deposited items over $2,000. I have to get copies of every check over $2,000. I have to get verification of what that was for. It's a really incredible amount of paper. I mean, just incredible.
It really is. I've seen it, and it can take months. And if you have one spouse who did all of the finances, and that person knew where things were, but maybe the other spouse doesn't, and they're going into a bank, and they're like, I don't know, where's your Social Security deposited? I don't know. It's awful. Like, you feel awful for that person, and in the back of your head, you feel awful, because you're like, oh my God, this is gonna take us a while. And in the whole, like when they get to this point, they're there because they need help. So now we're prolonging the process because you don't know where stuff is. And a lot of times you're at the mercy of a bank.
Absolutely.
And you can only go as fast as they're gonna go to.
And the issue also becomes if you've got a child who's now, parents incapacitated or ill, the child stepping in to handle the finances, but they haven't been involved up to this point or not very involved, so they don't know what's where. And their parent can't really help them because they're incapacitated. So that puts us in a situation where we're doing a lot of forensic accounting. Now, again, when I'm involved in a Medicaid application, we end up doing a lot of the legwork for clients, but it really becomes, forensic accounting. And when I went to law school, I went to law school because I didn't want to do any math, right? I didn't know I would have to do so much of it now. But again, and you would be surprised, and we were talking with Wendy about it before the program, you'd be surprised about the amount of money people forget about. I had a client who wrote a $50,000 check. She could not for the life of her remember why. I was like, if I write a $50,000 check, I'm pretty sure I know what it's for, right? But again, people, especially if they've got their income, that's all they're living off, they're really not that concerned with where everything is. And you'd be surprised at how many accounts are lost. I mean, big dollar amount accounts, it's insane. But anyway, so we're going through all of these, question.
One other question, that you said that they're looking at $2,000 or more.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an instance where you're trying to move money, not because of Medicaid, but because of a different reason, such as somebody spending the money and you want to protect it for their care, if you move it in smaller amounts than $2,000 at a time, will it be?
So what you can't do is get cheeky. And I have a lot of people that try to do this, right? Because they come in, they say, well, Mindy, you said $2,000, so I'm going to go and write 18 checks for $1,800. Is this below them? That's just the number that you definitely have to report. Anything below that, Department of Social Services can look and say, yeah, we want verification of that. So again, writing 5 $1,800 checks doesn't get them there, right? Because Department of Social Services doesn't have to ask, but they still can ask. Or if you're writing an $1,800 check every month, they're going to come back and because they're going through all the records. And what I try to tell people is you can't outsmart them, right? Because they do this every day. This is their job, 5 days a week. This is what they're doing. So they're going to look at that. They're going to catch those trends and say, where is this money going? Now again, there's a lot of ways that I help clients make sure that they're doing things better. If people are spending money, that's okay to spend money. We just want to make sure we're doing it in a smart way, that we're not withdrawing $1,000 every month in cash to spend things. And there's a generation, the older generation is a generation of cash, right? They don't want a debit card. They want to write it in a check or they want to use cash. So we can sometimes run into problems because the issue becomes Department of Social Services assumes everything is a gift, right? So the assumption is it's a gift. You have to overcome that presumption. So oftentimes we run into problems with that. If people gamble, right? If people are withdrawing money and taking it to the casino and gambling, they're saying, where are these large chunks of money going? We have to try to prove that they didn't give it away, that they just lost it because they gambled. Now nowadays with the little cards, it's easier to track. The casinos have they know everything in value. So it's easier, but again, if people are taking money as cash and sticking it under their mattress, if they're getting their driveway paved and they pay the contractor in cash because he said, look, if you pay me in cash, I'll give you a 15% discount, right? Great, here's cash. All of us, they withdraw the check, they have it in cash. We have to come back and try to prove that. Now, oftentimes we can if we have an invoice or something like that, but sometimes it's really not a gift. It wasn't an intentional gift, but we have no way to prove otherwise, and then we're stuck being penalized for it, which is how we get to the penalty period.
I have a question. You already mentioned that the IRS rules are not the same. You know how you can give $13,000 or $14,000 to family members? Is that then included as part of that?
Right, so Wendy actually brings up a really great point. So, and this confuses a lot of people as well. So every year you have an annual exclusion gift, which means you can gift $14,000 per person per year to anyone without incurring any kind of a gift tax. So I could be very generous, Angela and I could be very generous and say, you know what, you guys are a great audience, $14,000 for everybody. It's like Oprah up here, You all get it. We can do that without having any kind of gift tax penalty for us, okay? But that doesn't mean there's no Medicaid penalty. So if I have to then apply for Medicaid, they're gonna say, we don't care that there's no gift tax associated with that gift. You still made a gift, so we're still gonna penalize you for the gift, okay? So what happens, what is a penalty period? So penalty period is a period of time where Department of Social Services says, yes, you're eligible for Medicaid, but no, we're not going to pay for your care because you've made these gifts. So somebody else has to pay. We don't care who it is. It's just not going to be us. And how they have questions in the back.
Just one question, do they total up the gifts and then take that off the Medicare once that gift amount is spent?
I will answer it in
Okay.
1 minute. So essentially what they do is they take the total value, all the gifts made during that 5 years. So if you made a $100,000 gift every year, they're going to calculate that up to $500,000, okay? And they're gonna divide it by what's called the regional rate, which is the average cost of care in our region. And that's gonna give you the penalty period. So the average, again, and these numbers change every year. We are in the western region, and our regional rate is $8,971. So Department of Social Services or the state says that's the average cost of care in our region. Now in Erie County, the cost of care is much more than that, as we said. It's really anywhere between $9,000 and $12,000 a month. But again, it takes into account some of the other counties that have a lower cost of living. So to calculate it, if over the 5-year we added up all the gifts made, and we had $100,000 worth of gifts, we'd take that $100,000, divide it by 8,971, and we'd come out with 11.1. So Department of Social Services would say, you have an 11.1 penalty period. Now the penalty period only begins to run when you're otherwise eligible, which means you have less than $14,500 and you're in a penalty period. Or excuse me, and you're in a nursing home. So if you made this $100,000 gift 3 years before you went into a nursing home, that 11.5-month penalty period is just hanging out, it's just waiting for you. It's not going to start until you have less than $14,550. Now you guys might say, well, very logically, well, gosh, if I only have $14,550, how am I going to pay for 11 months of nursing home care, right? Because you don't have any money left. So the issue becomes who's going to pay for care. The nursing homes, Medicaid says we don't care, it's just not going to be us. If you're in the nursing home's going to be pretty unhappy that there's an 11-month, a bill for 11 months of care, which is going to run about $100,000 or so out unpaid. So they might go after you, the person making the gift. They'll definitely go after the person you made the gift to say, okay, get me that money back. Because what I hear a lot, and I know Angie hears in her office, they say, well, what do I care? Why don't I just give it away, get in the nursing home, pay, the penalty period's there. I don't care. I don't have to pay it. Who's going to complain, right? And I say, absolutely, the nursing homes will complain. They will sue you. They will sue your kids. And they'll have a claim because they'll say, you're committing fraud. You're giving this money away, knowing you're going to need this service to try to get eligible.
Always hope your kids do not spend it.
Exactly, and hope that the kids didn't spend it.
Actually had one yesterday where the mother has started to give to the children. And she said, the daughter told me, it's for mom's care, I'm not going to touch it, but my brother spent his and bought a house.
And I mean, the issue with gifting to your kids to hang on to the money, as Angela said, is just that. They can spend it. What if that kid gets divorced? All of a sudden that money is now, hey, marital property, or you have to explain it, or the divorcing spouse says, listen, I won't go after your mom's money, but you're going to give me all of the things that I want. Or what if the child has a creditor of their own? What if they get, have a judgment creditor against them? The judgment creditor doesn't care whose money it was, they just care whose money it is now. So there are some exceptions to the transfer penalty rules. But before I go to that, did I answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. So transfers between spouses are exempt. So if you have the husband with all the accounts, and Angela, I see this oftentimes, the husband's always managed the money, he has all the accounts in his name, the wife really just never was involved and didn't care. Now, if they have $70,000 between the two of them, to get the husband eligible for Medicaid, we can simply take the money from his name, put it in his wife's name, now he's eligible for Medicaid. Between spouses, there is no penalty. The issue becomes a transfer by one spouse will negatively affect another spouse. So again, if you have a husband and wife, and we find this a lot in second marriages, who had a later in life marriage, they love each other, but they've kept their money separate. My money is for my kids, your money is for your kids. It's always been that way, it's always going to be that way. We're comfortable, that's how we're living our life. We're not combining our funds. We see it a lot. But what happens is, say, the wife is very generous with her kids need a lot of help. She gives her kids a lot of money all the time. Now the husband needs care. The gifts the wife made to her children are going to create a penalty for the husband. Regardless of you come in the very logical argument that says, look, clearly this is separate, these are two different households essentially. Medicaid doesn't say. They don't care. Because unfortunately what we deal with a lot with them is that reason doesn't play a part in this. These are the rules and that's how they're affected. So in a circumstance like that we can run into a lot of problems.
What if they choose to divorce to qualify? Is there a look back on a divorce situation?
Generally, divorce is not a planning tool that we use to qualify for Medicaid. you guys laugh, but it was a very good question because in some states that's what people do.
I know a lot of people don't get married for that reason.
a lot of people,
And we'll live
exactly.
together as elders.
And
We'll
chance,
divorce.
if elderly clients came to me with this kind of scenario, we love each other, we have 2 separate pots, we want to keep 2 separate pots, should we get married? My advice would be absolutely not. You know, because again, then you're essentially protecting each other, you're protecting each other's kids. Now, you could try in a circumstance, like I said, to get a divorce, and you might be able to show very clearly that money was separate, and so everybody gets to go their own ways. A lot of times clients don't want a divorce, right? They say, that doesn't feel right to me, my husband's ill, so I'm gonna divorce him. You know, that my conscience isn't cool with that. Plus, divorces take a long time. So the other issue is if they're a couple who have, who haven't had this separation, they've commingled their assets. In a divorce setting, the wife's never gonna walk away with everything. The husband's always gonna get his share. So it won't accomplish what people want to think it would accomplish. But in some states they do that. And I should caveat that with, Medicaid planning in every state is different because it's a federal program that's implemented by each state. So what works here in New York might not be what works in Pennsylvania.
What about a prenup?
Oh, yeah, a prenup, how does a prenup
A
affect?
prenup has no effect. Medicaid says we don't care. You can give me the prenup, but it doesn't matter. The rules are the rules. So I don't care if you guys divorce or if you die, how you're going to divvy up your assets. I just care for our purposes today. So a prenuptial agreement will not overcome all of these rules that we're talking about. I'm sorry, that really flashed brightly. So a couple of the other exempt transfers is, and this is going to the question in the back, there are some ways we can transfer the house without creating any kind of a penalty. The first is, of course, to the spouse. The second is to a caregiver child who has lived in the house for at least 2 years prior to the applicant entering the nursing home. And caregiving is a pretty general term. It doesn't mean you have to provide, showering, bathing, all the things Angela had talked about earlier. It could simply be driving mom or dad to the hospital or to the doctor, preparing meals, helping them get dressed, doing the laundry, kind of general caregiving. Then we can transfer the property to that caregiver child without any kind of a penalty. However, and that's a good rule, and if we have that option, we are going to use it, because again, for a lot of people, their house is a large chunk of their assets. But there are problems that run into this, where there's more than one child, right? There's 3 kids, mom and dad always tended to treat everybody equally, but now the house can only go to 1 kid. Now again, if the family gets along, the other siblings are going to say, look, we get it, we transfer it to you. Once it goes to the caregiving child, they can do whatever they want. They can execute the next day a deed getting all 3 children on the property. They can sell the house, divvy it up with their siblings. They can do it a lot of different ways, but they have to want to. If the caregiver says, you two are no good for nothings, I've been doing all the work, I'm not going to put you on the deed. Those 2 other children have no recourse against that. And as you can imagine, it can cause some family trouble, family issues. But it's certainly a helpful tool if we have it. Just to quickly pipe in, no matter how much you think your kids, your family like each other and that they get along really well while you're alive, I have seen so many times the minute something happens, like Mindy said, one of the kids gets the house, all hats are on. I have seen it so many times where I was like, oh my God, you guys liked each other. And now they're in court. And so money changes people in ways that you may not even want to comprehend right now. So I've seen a lot where I'm going to transfer the house to my kid. Like, I have 5 years, I'm going to live 5 years, it's not going to be a big deal. Yeah. And they'll do the right thing, right? Yeah, they'll do it. Jimmy's so great. He watches me, right? He can be great right now. You don't know what Jimmy's going to do, 6 months when you're into the nursing home. And divorce is another, and always keep in mind the divorce. I got married, what was I thinking? It's bad for my taxes, and I have a 50% chance of making it through. But those are the statistics. So when people get married, they've got about a 50% chance of making it. And when you transfer assets like this, just transferring them out, those things are susceptible. Yeah, and to sort of piggyback on Angela's point, family dynamics change when the parents are gone. Whether there's money involved or not, all of a sudden, the glue, right? The glue that was holding everybody together isn't there. And so there's a lot of, there can be a lot of infighting between siblings. So what we try to do as part of our practice, and I know Angela does the same, is take out the ability for kids to fight. To say, we're not gonna let somebody just be in charge and do the right thing, because that is just, cause for disaster.
So let's set it up clear, so the kids want to be mad at somebody, they can be mad at you, right? What do you care? So that's really that section of it. So the other exceptions are a sibling who's lived in the house for at least 1 year, and they have an equity interest in the house. So if you've got, brother and sister living in a house, brother owns the house, sister's been living there, goes into a nursing home, we could transfer it to her as long as she has provided some equity interest, which means she's paying rent, she's helping out with household expenses, she's paid property taxes, she's paid the electric bill, she's put in some money into this house. Now again, this is one we run into not that frequently, because I know if I, for example, was living in a house with my brother, none of us would make it to old age because we both dead. A dependent child under the age of 21. Again, an uncommon scenario for us, but it comes up, and so when we can, we do it. Or a blind or disabled child of any age. And it has to be a child, it cannot be a grandchild. But it doesn't happen a lot up here in Western New York, but downstate where, housing values are, $700,000, $800,000, and you've got a grandchild who's been living with that person, a lot of times what people are doing is actually having the incapacitated person adopt the grandchild as a child so that they can, avail of this technique. Around here, we don't do that too much. Other options for exempt transfers are transfers to a disabled child of any age or a blind child of any age for that person's benefit. Again, the idea behind it is Department of Social Services realized that if by that disabled child having those resources in their name, that's going to be less money that Department of Social Services is going to expend for their care. The purchases for fair market value. So to sort of piggyback on the question in the back, if people are spending money, that's okay, right? You can go out. If you want to take a vacation, if you want to go to Europe, if you want to buy a new car, you can do that. Those things are not going to be penalized. So a lot of times when I have clients coming in who are just sort of over the resource allowance, my advice is spend your money, right? If you need a new kitchen, if you need a new driveway, a new roof, new water heater, now is the time. If you need a new car but you've just been waiting on it, hold off on it. And even clients who are over-resourced, I say, look, you guys worked hard for your money, and I know Angela tells her clients the same thing. You guys worked hard for your money, you should enjoy it. I know we're doing things to save it for the next generation, but you guys should enjoy it. You can't take it with you. But I have a hard time getting anyone to spend money. I even offer to come help them. I will help any of you spend your money. I'm just that generous. I know Angela too.
Oh, we're good at it.
Great. I was like, God, I wish I had a problem spending money. But, like we already talked about, prepaid burial expenses. So what do we do? Okay, what happens if somebody calls me up and says, Mindy, my mom's in a nursing home. Is there anything we can do? I've been told there isn't anything we can do. The nursing home hasn't told me anything. Because what I have to tell people is nursing homes are businesses. They're not going to tell you how to preserve your money. They don't want you to preserve your money, right? They want you to spend all of your money, because that's how they make more money, and then become eligible for Medicaid. That's what they want. So they're never going to tell you how to do things to protect their money, or to protect your money, because that means they're going to get paid less. And any plan we do, we never contemplate not paying the nursing home. They're providing a service, they're entitled to what they're entitled to, but we're just saying, here's the system. How do we work within the system to preserve assets for the next generation? So to do a crisis plan, it's like I talked about. Somebody calls me up, mom's in a nursing home, or about to go into a nursing home, what can we do? And we call it a gift and loan strategy. So essentially what we do is we make a gift to intentionally create a penalty period. And so for example, if mom has, we'll say mom has $100,000 or $200,000, okay, just for example purposes. When they call me, I'll say, again, this is a very simplified version of how it would go, and say, okay, we're going to take $100,000 and we are going to make a gift of it to the children. Now, we have to make sure we have the authority to make the gift in the power of attorney, but we're going to make a gift to the children. The gift has to be made in accordance with that person's estate plan, so we don't run into any issues of going to court. We know that that gift is going to create an 11.1 month penalty period, okay? But because we still have that other $100,000 in there, we can't start the penalty period. We just spend it all down to zero and then apply for Medicaid. They're going to say, it's great that you spent all that money, but you still have an 11-month penalty period where no one's going to pay for 11 months. So essentially what we do is we take that other $100,000 and we loan it. So I've loaned it to Angela in my example. She's going to pay that back to me over 11 months, okay? Every time she makes a payment to me, I take it and pay it to the nursing home. Why this works is because Department of Social Services doesn't consider a loan a resource. And these are structured loans. They've got promissory notes. They have to be repaid with interest. They have to be a specific type of Medicaid qualified loan. But they don't count that $100,000 I loaned Angela as a resource, okay? Where you and I say, God, she owes me $100,000, I have a promissory note, I count that in my resource column. They're only counting it the money that she's paying me back every month. The $9,000 every month that she pays me, that's all they count. So essentially what that does is it allows us to create a mechanism where we're gifting out $100,000. She's paying me back for 11 months, so for 11 months I pay the nursing home. At month 12, Medicaid starts paying, and I've now protected $100,000. So what it does is it allows us to get the money out of our name to start the penalty period and create a mechanism for paying for the penalty period during that time. And we have some examples at the end that we're going to go through that I think will help you go through it.
I'll throw a little faster.
I'm going through a little faster. So,
Mindy?
I know, I have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, quick question. When you have that period with insurance where you have to pay like 30 days or whatever, can you use that, is that part of your look back or does that get added on to your look back period?
Well, it depends. If you're on Medicare, that's a whole different planning standpoint. If you just go into a nursing home facility from your home to a nursing home, there is no 30-day window.
Right.
We can start the planning that day. If you have 100 days of Medicare involved, we generally can't implement the plan until after your Medicare days are over.
In today's business world where many companies have eliminated pensions, I'm somewhat surprised that principal balances of IRAs, 401ks, and 403bs are not considered an asset.
And I agree with you, it's sort of surprising why they're not considered an asset. That's what the regulations say. I think the other reason too is because IRAs and 401ks have creditor protection against them. So if I have a 401k or an IRA, I have an IRA with Angela, in fact, and I get a judgment creditor against me, my judgment creditor never gets to attack my IRA because they have built-in protection.
And two, you're gonna have to take your RMD.
Right.
So there's your stream of income and your average age, because you have to take your required minimum distribution at 70 and a half. When you go into a nursing home, you're older than 70 and a half, and so then you have a steady stream of income coming in.
If you're younger than 70 and a half and you go into a nursing home, which happens, but you're over 59 and a half, you can start taking the required minimum distributions.
And the second question would be, I understand your approach with maybe trying to get on Medicaid, but it's my understanding if someone goes to a nursing home, you generally prefer your parent go to a nice nursing home. They're not going to be real anxious to accept Medicaid patients.
So that's an excellent question. But to say, how do we get our parent into a good nursing home? Because saving money is important, but it's not as important as the parent's care. So that's an excellent question because we want to make sure people have assets in their name. So when they go to apply for the nursing home rolls out the red carpet and says welcome. But once you're in a nursing home, they cannot discharge you and they cannot discriminate against you based on the form of payment. So again, we don't disclose this, that we're going to do this to the nursing home before you get in. Once your foot's in the door, we can do this type of planning, and it has no negative consequence to the patient.
Right.
Okay.
But don't they want to see your assets?
Right, but we show them the assets
show
because this happens all after they're in a nursing home.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we show them the assets. When clients call me up and say, Mindy, they're asking me this question, should I lie about the assets? Should I tell them I don't have it? I say, no, you want them to know what you have. You want them to think you are a good candidate and that they want you. Because again, they can't do anything with that information. They're not going to penalize you. All of the things we talked about, we're going to tell Department of Social Services we did it. We're not hiding anything from anyone. We're essentially saying, these are the rules that are in place. This is perfectly legitimate and legal and allowable under the rules, so we're going to do it. So essentially, a Medicaid plan, and Medicaid is very complicated. So there's a lot of things we can do to get somebody eligible and preserve assets. We essentially just have to look at what rules are to our benefit and how do we use them.
Yeah, so our goal, and that's why Mindy and I work so close together. Our goal is we look at your assets, we look at pension, we look at IRAs, we look at everything. And yes, we want to have a chunk of money that we can say, hey, Canterbury, we're here. Or, Greenfields is a beautiful one. I toured all of them. So you want to go somewhere and you want to say, I can pay. And because between a self-pay and your Medicaid bed. There aren't a lot of Medicaid beds here in Western New York, and they can put you 100 miles from your home. So you aren't going to get a say as to where you go.
From the admission process. Once you're in there, they cannot discriminate.
So our goal is to have enough so you can pick where you want to go so that we can pay, but also in the back of our mind knowing that 2 years, 3 years of being in a nursing home or even a place with good care and good assisted living, that can clean out anybody's retirement. That's just for one spouse. Right? So everything that you save for the grandkids, your children, trying to pass, gifting to UV, all those philanthropical things that you really worked hard for can be wiped out. So we're not trying to, like Mindy said, we're using the rules to the best of our ability. We're playing by their game, but we're also being smart about it. Because once we're in, we want to know that we still have assets protected. That's where the long-term care insurance comes into play.
You're saying they can't discriminate. Let's say you're in Canterbury Woods. In Canterbury Woods also, I don't know if they do, but let's say they own a budget nursing home. Can they transfer you out of Canterbury Woods to the budget
No,
nursing home?
unless they have a reason, unless they can't provide you care, or you're disruptive or aggressive. I mean, there's a reason. The nursing homes, there are no good nursing homes, so I'll say that. But in Western New York, we are lucky because they're generally locally run nursing homes. They're not doing things like that. They're not doing these shady things where they're trying to discharge you from one facility to another facility. And if they're doing it, they can definitely not do it based on dollars. They have to have a legitimate reason, or else they're going to be in big trouble with the Department of Health.
They could give you a roommate though, right?
Once you're on Medicaid, you have to have a shared room, so you can no longer have a private room.
In memory care, I would say more things that I've seen lately is memory care. Somebody has Alzheimer's, dementia, their cognitive impairment is in there. So it's not always your body breaks down, a lot of times it's your mind breaks down. So that goes back to facilities, you wanting to get to a good place.
I'm going to think we hold the questions, because
Okay,
I think
sorry.
we've got a lot of things to cover still. But hang on to your questions, we'll talk about it at the end, because we've got some examples that might help answer some of the questions going forward. There's just a couple more things before we get to the examples, and I'm going to go through it quickly, because I think we're on a time crunch here, because I talk too much. But so the one thing I want to point out, I think it's important enough to take the time to talk about, is revocable trusts do not protect your assets from Medicaid. Because I don't know how many times I've seen it, I know Angela's seen it, people come in and they say, my mom's going to a nursing home, but she's good. She did this trust 10 years ago, her money's all protected, no problem. We look at it, it's a revocable trust, which means the person who created the trust can take money in and out, make changes to the trust all they want. It's really an estate planning tool to avoid probate, and it has a lot of good uses. But it does not help us with Medicaid planning. So if you have a revocable trust and you think it's going to protect you from Medicaid, it will not. But what will protect your assets from Medicaid is an irrevocable trust. Okay? Irrevocable trusts are trusts that we create a lot of times for asset protection planning. So this is sort of the advanced planning piece. I'm going to go through all this really quick. Sound effects? It's an advanced planning technique to preserve assets. So what it does, we create this trust, okay? Typically the creators are the applicant. They can also be the trustees of the trust if they choose, or they can name their children however they want to do it, or whomever they want really. The terms of the trust are such that all of the income of the trust can come out to the grantor, the person that created it, but none of the principal. So the grantor has given up their right to principal. And by giving up their ability to kind of reach into that pot and pull those assets back, their creditors cannot reach into the pot and pull their assets back, which means a nursing home can't attack those creditors. But more importantly for our discussion here, Medicaid doesn't count that as a resource. They say, you've given this money away. This is a gift. From a tax perspective, it's not a completed gift, so it has no gift tax consequences. But from Medicaid standpoint, they say you've given this away. So what that does, when we create this trust and we fund assets, which is retitle assets in the name of the trust, you've effectively made a gift and you've started your 5-year clock running. So if we can get through 5 years in one day, it doesn't matter what the value of the gift. If it was $100,000, it was $500,000, it doesn't matter, it doesn't count. So getting through 5 years in one day is the goal. So really the earlier we start this process, the better off we're going to be. if we get to 4.5 years and somebody needs care, oftentimes we'll sit down, we'll look at the assets, we'll say, let's just pay for the next 6 months before we apply for Medicaid, because then we will get to that end point and we'll have this money protected. We never transfer everything into the trust. So to this gentleman's point, we don't want to give all of your assets to the trust because they're not considered yours. So when you go to apply for a nursing home, you don't get to list them on your sheet and you're no longer a good candidate. But what I like to transfer to the trust is your house, okay? Because you're not utilizing the principal of your house. I have not yet had a client say, my retirement plan, Mindy, is to sell my house, buy an RV, and that's how I'm going to retire. Because you're living in your house, right? So you can utilize the house. You're not slicing off pieces of your house to distribute as principal. If you have vacation property, hunting camp, a lake house, that's a good asset to transfer in the trust, because a lot of people have those, want to pass them down to the next generation, and they have no exemption, they have no protection. And your never money is a good asset to put into that house. The assets you have with Angela, that you say, look, I'm just living off that income. I have no intention of ever touching that money. I haven't touched it in 10 years. The only reason I would ever have to pull that money out is for long-term care costs. That's good money to put in there. Like I said, we're never going to put all the money in, and that's where we sit down with the advisors and we look, what is the best thing to put into this pot? Angela and I are doing that tomorrow, in fact, to say, you've got all of these pools of assets, what is the best to put in there? Because also, if you remember, any appreciation of these assets in the trust during that time, again, that appreciation is outside of that person's name from an estate or from a Medicaid standpoint. So some of the terms to the trust, if you have real property, if you have your house in the trust, you have lifetime rights to live in the trust, or live in the house. You can't live in the trust. You have to pay all the maintenance costs, so you're still responsible for the taxes, the upkeep, everything like that. You retain your property tax exemptions, which means if you have STAR, senior STAR, veteran exemption, you get to retain those things. Your trustee cannot sell the house out from under you. They cannot evict you. You don't have any of those worries. It's better than giving it outright to your children because you don't run into the divorce issue, the creditor issue, the kids fighting issue. But you can sell the house if you choose to. So if we do this, put this plan into place, 3 years later you say, you know what, I've had enough of Buffalo, I've had enough of the winter because it's going to snow any minute now, I'm moving to Florida. You can have your trustee sell the house, again, sell it in the name of the trust, purchase the new property in Florida in the name of the trust. We haven't affected our 5-year clock. 5-year clock just keeps ticking. So we can always change the nature of the investments in the trust. Or if you want to stay local, but you say, I want to move in with my daughter because she's built a new house, she built me a mother-daughter, I'm going to move in there. Sell the house, open an investment account with Angela, she invests it, you get the income, and the 5-year clock still keeps ticking along. We have never exposed those assets to Medicaid. You also preserve for real property your capital gains exclusion, which means that if the property is sold, you still get your capital gains exclusion amount, which is for a married couple $500,000, for an individual $250,000. If you gift property to your children, they don't have that capital gains exclusion exemption because they're not living in the property. So whatever you paid for it, the difference between what you paid for it and what you sold it for, that difference is going to be subject to the capital gains tax, which is a pretty hefty tax, really. Upon your death, the assets pass to whomever you choose to pass them to. It could be your children in any share. We also built in what's called a power of appointment, which lets you change your beneficiaries. So even though this trust is irrevocable, we have a lot of ways we can make changes to it. So you can always change the beneficiaries of the trust. So if you name your 2 kids, for example, and one of them says, great, I know I'm getting 50% of this trust, so forget no more Mother's Day cards, no more Father's Day cards, and I'm never going to talk to you again because I already know I'm going to inherit this money. It's not exactly the case. You can always cut them out or add beneficiaries over time. You can also revoke the trust. So even though this trust says it's irrevocable, because some people say, God, Mindy, that's really a big commitment, and I don't know if I feel comfortable with it yet. Or what if I don't make it through the 5 years? What if I only make it 1 year? And then I need Medicaid, and it's not going to work out. We can actually always revoke the trust because there's a New York State statute that says any trust can be revoked as long as you get everybody to say so. So as long as all of the creators of the trust, the trustees of the trust, and all of the beneficiaries of the trust agree, we get to revoke the trust. You say, but Mindy, what if my kid's the trustee, my kid's the beneficiary? They know they're getting this money, so they don't agree. Well, of course, we've built in provisions that'll let you fire any trustee. So you can say, well, kids, now you're out as the trustee. So I'm going to put somebody in there that will agree. I'm also going to disinherit you under this power of appointment, so even if you say no, then you're out, and then I'll revoke the trust anyway. So it has a lot of flexibility, even though it says it's irrevocable, there's a lot of things we can do with it. And I know I went through that very quickly. I'm happy to talk to anybody about it in more detail, but we're gonna move on because we've done a couple of case studies that I think will give people a better idea of how this all works. And I have a veteran slide, which I'm gonna skip over for today's purposes, only because I know we're pushing our time limits. But I will just mention one thing. If someone is in assisted living or getting home care and they're a veteran, there is an additional veteran's pension called aid and attendance that somebody can be eligible for in those circumstances that would provide, approximately $1,700 a month in additional income to that person to help pay for those costs of care. But certainly if anybody has questions about that, we'd be happy to talk about it afterwards.
Okay, so we have two examples. Would you find it more beneficial to do a couple or an individual person? You tell us what you'd like more. Individual? Okay.
Okay, so then we are going to go through example one. This is Barbara. This is Barbara. Okay, so what we've given you is just sort of Barbara's stats, okay? So it can help you follow along a little bit. So Barbara's 70. She's in good health. She is divorced with 2 daughters. She owns her own home. She has no mortgage on it. I'm going to let you guys look at the numbers. I won't have to go through them, but she's got assets. She's got an IRA, a traditional IRA. She has a Roth IRA. And what I didn't mention as part of my presentation is Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs from a Medicaid standpoint are treated exactly the same. Even though you're Roth, you don't require the minimum distribution. If you're applying for Medicaid, what we do is we start taking a minimum distribution the same as if it were traditional. She's got cash in the bank, about $50,000, investment assets of $200,000. She's got Social Security, a pension, and some investment income. And so her total income is about $2,700 a month. So Barbara's goals, and Barbara's actually based off a client that Angela and I actually worked on together. But of course, all names have been changed to protect the innocent. Barbara's goals really, when she met with Angela and I, were to sort of maximize her benefit for her own retirement, right? Because she wanted to live a good retirement and do the things that she wanted to do. But she also wanted to preserve as much of her assets for her children as she could. And Angela and I, as we had mentioned earlier, said long-term care insurance is the best way to accomplish that. If you have long-term care insurance, we can protect 95% of your assets. But, Angela did all the calculations and just found for Barbara, it wasn't the right fit. Her income didn't really support it, and with her other cost of living. But we went through the exercise, which I advise everybody to do, because it's worthwhile to sit down and look at it, because you don't know. And as Angela said before, there's a lot of products out there. I don't know what they are necessarily, because I don't do that type of work. I just know that there's a lot of options. There's a lot of things that people like Angela can do to fit what your needs are. Yeah. So when we met Barbara, she hadn't updated her planning documents, okay? So she was divorced in the early 90s. She had a will that she had created right after that disinherited her daughters because there was some family friction after the divorce. She had a power of attorney, but that power of attorney limited the gifting to $10,000 per person per year. She had no health care proxy, and her IRA beneficiary designation still listed her ex-husband. And the beneficiary designation on her Roth listed her estate.
The X's are listed a lot.
Right. So when we met with her, the first case of triage was the estate planning. So we had to update her will to include her daughters because that was her intent. And we also had to update her power of attorney because there was a new power of attorney form set forth by New York State in 2010. It's completely different. The old form's 1 page, double-sided, right? My new form is 20 pages. So the idea being is that if we had to do this crisis Medicaid planning with Barbara's power of attorney, we wouldn't be able to. We would not be able to do any of the things we just talked about because her gifting is limited to $10,000 per person per year. If we have to make that large $100,000 gift, we're out of luck. We're stuck then trying to go to surrogate's court to get a guardianship to allow doing this planning, which takes a long time. And with this planning, every month we wait, we are losing $10,000. So there's really a big time value of money here. We did a health care proxy, which is important for everyone to have, so that if Barbara ever got sick, her daughters could get her admitted to a nursing home, can handle those things. And then, so we updated those documents, that was the initial step. So we're sort of going to have Barbara have two different realities here. A reality where she did no advanced planning, and a reality where she did do advanced planning. So we're going to start with, Barbara said no to the trust, we talked about it, she said thanks, but no thanks. Okay.
Not interested.
So as Barbara got older, in her later 70s, she decided she wanted to update her will because she wanted to be more charitable, because she went to UB, she worked on the student newspaper, she really enjoyed her time here, she's got enough money she wants to give back, her kids have enough, and she had really felt that she benefited from. So she wanted to make some charitable gifts to UB of a total about $55,000. So we sat down with Angela, we said, what is the best pot of money to make this gift from? Where's the best way to do it? Because you can make gifts in a lot of ways, under beneficiary designations, through your will, a lot of different ways. We said you can make the gift now, today, you can enjoy the good feelings of making the gift, which I think people overlook, honestly. She said, no, I want to do it in my will, so that's where we ended up. So Barbara started then suffering from some Alzheimer's dementia. Right before her 81st birthday, she falls, she breaks her hip, her kids say, she can't stay home anymore. We can't take care of her, right? We've got one kid who's out of town, the kid who's here has her own young children to deal with, she can't handle it. So they get Barbara admitted to a facility. Up to that point, they really hadn't been involved with her finances. They didn't have a relationship with her advisor. So what they did is they took $30,000 out of her IRA because an accountant told them that's, from a tax perspective, the best thing to do. So they took that $30,000 out to pay for 3 months. All of a sudden, Angela, who's the advisor, says, hey, wait a second. Barbara's never taken more than she's ever absolutely had to out of this IRA. This isn't right. Calls the kids and says, what's going on? Then we find out what's going on. Angela called me. We sit down with the family and say, what can we do now? So we'll kind of go through what we would do in this circumstance. So as we talked about, the IRAs are going to be protected, both the traditional and the Roth. So we still have about $50,000 left in each of them. Yeah, very good. $50,000, because remember, her kids withdrew that $30,000. And once you take it out, you can't put it back in, right? But again, we had told them, stop doing that immediately, because this is protected assets. So that leaves us with about $450,000 of exposed assets, which we certainly could spend down on Barbara's care, but that wasn't Barbara's goal, right? So the issue first and foremost becomes the house. What do we do with the house? Barbara's not living there anymore. It's no longer considered exempt. We could just leave the house there, but Medicaid's going to put a lien on it like we talked about, so that's really not doing us any good. So we kind of run into two options. We can gift the house away to the kids, or we can try to fire sale the house, sell. And what do you guys think in all of those circumstances the kids want to do?
Sell the house.
Sell the house, exactly. Because they don't want to be responsible for the upkeep of the house. They want to be responsible for the liability of the house. Once your homeowner's insurance finds out no one's living there, they're not going to insure the house. Then you've got to worry about people breaking in, pipes freezing, all of those things. The kids don't want to be landlords, right? So now we're in a position where we have to fire sale the house. That becomes an issue because we talked about the time value of money. Every month that it takes to get this house sold, it's costing us more and more money. So that's, just to kind of highlight some issues with houses. Let's assume that we get the house sold, we get it sold quick. Because what I tell my clients, what I tell their realtors, say, just put a reasonable asking price. When an offer comes in that's reasonable, take it. Unless within 2 days of that offer you get a better offer, take it. If someone's paying in cash, take that one. Because again, it's hard for people to conceptualize because they say, but the house is worth this. It's worth $10,000 more. I said, I know, but to get us that, it's going to take us 6 more months, which costs us $60,000. So it's hard for people to conceptualize, but that's the conversation we have. And Angela and I, unfortunately, in these circumstances, have to have a lot of what I call hard truths. A lot of hard conversations with people.
That's why we're so comical.
Yeah, we try. It's hard to make people laugh when we're talking about this kind of stuff. So in this circumstance, we are going to do a crisis planning like we talked about. So we are going to make a gift of $270,000 of assets. Now again, in my example, we are gifting cash. When you have things that are not cash, like for example the house, it makes it much harder to do this type of thing. So we've gifted cash, or we've gifted investments. The other thing that I want to add is the gifts under New York State law have to be made in accordance with a person's estate plan. So the gifts are not just to the children. UB, in my example, would get a pro rata share, but it's a much smaller share than Barbara originally intended. So Barbara's intent isn't really being 100% realized in this scenario. And that gift is gonna create a 30-month penalty, okay? So we have to pay for 30 months, which frankly is a long time for somebody in a nursing home, but we've definitely seen people stay there beyond that time frame. And then we make a loan of about $180,000. So that loan is gonna repay every month. So if Barbara had made the loan, her agent or her power of attorney makes the loan to one of the children. Every month they pay Barbara back. Barbara's power of attorney pays the nursing home. So on the 31st month, we have Medicaid start paying, and Barbara is now on Medicaid. So in this scenario, we have saved Barbara $270,000, and we have spent approximately $210,000.
Any questions on that?
Please
Because I
go
know
papers.
it's kind of confusing and we went through that.
Was I going too quickly?
Who pays for your services for all this crisis planning? Do the kids somehow have to have a pot of money
No,
to
no,
pay
but
for you guys?
that's a good question.
And obviously it's gonna cost more than if people had been doing
Exactly.
updates along.
So, you know, I'll be honest, to do this kind of crisis planning generally costs around $10,000. But Barbara always pays. Because what I tell the kids, and I run into this a lot, the kids are paying for Barbara. They're saying, well, I'm gonna buy her this, I'm gonna buy her that, I'm gonna buy her that. And I say, why are you doing that? You know, in this plan, Barbara's money, each dollar Barbara has is really 50 cents. Because 50% of every dollar she's paying towards care. So we should spend Barbara's money on the things that we can, which would certainly be my fee. And my fee is built into the plan so that it kind of comes off the top. Because again, we're spending 50-cent dollars. So I tell them, if she needs anything, get it now because you're spending 50-cent dollars with a type of plan like this. Every dollar she has, she keeps 50, she gives you 50 cents, she spends 50 cents on care. Okay?
All this changes if Barbara hits a crisis and goes into the home, right?
Say that again?
All of your planning there changes.
This is exactly what we would do if Barbara went into the nursing home.
Yep. This was Barbara, she didn't really plan, we did a couple things, but this was the best. Sometimes people just don't want to do what you tell them to do. You know, you get that stubborn person who's like, when the time comes, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to eat magic mushrooms.
I'm never going to go into a nursing home.
Never going to happen to me. So we do actually get this. So now we'll do what actually, like when they do planning.
Right, and I should have been more clear. So at this circumstance, you know, Barbara had been in the nursing home. Angela called the kids to say, why is she taking all this money out? The kids explained to her what's going on. So she's already in the facility. So we haven't run into the problem of her getting in. She had on paper $450,000. So the facility rolled out the red carpet and welcomed Barbara in because she had the resources. And then we were able to do the planning to get, you know, to save the family, you know, $270,000, which is not walking around money, right? We could have done nothing and spent down and wait to see what would happen at the end.
Yeah, it did cost us.
It cost us, right?
I just have one question. Give me like 2 sentences on like what an average term of that loan would be. I just don't understand.
So these loans are specific Medicaid qualified loans, which means they have to be repaid in equal shares. So each payment, there's no balloon payments allowed. They have to be payments in equal shares. They cannot be cancelable upon death. They cannot be transferable. So they have no value on the open market. Nobody wants to buy this. What are the other provisions for it?
Do you have a timeline? Like, what are the terms of years?
Oh, is a term of years? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. The term of years has to be within someone's life expectancy. So 31 months, in Barbara's case, 81, is perfectly within her life expectancy. If Barbara was 102, it would probably not be in her life expectancy, and then we would have an issue. So the maximum term is really just what the life expectancy. There is a point that comes where doing crisis planning doesn't make sense. If someone has enough money that we do the calculation, or I sit down and do the calculation and say, you know what, you're better off making a big gift now. And that generally is around $1 million, $1.2 million. Say, let's make a $600,000 gift, privately pay for 5 years. At the end of that, you'll be outside the look-back period, and you'll be better off. So that does come into play when you have a larger dollar value. But again, you're still spending, you know, $500,000.
Sure.
So there's some ways that we can protect that even for those people. And a lot of times people have those bigger asset values. You know, they're better candidates generally for long-term care insurance, and we advocate if they have the income stream that they do that, because that's really, if you want to save 95% of your assets, that's the way to do it. I can't say to you, with even all my tricks in the book, I can't save you 95%, okay? Generally, we save around 50 or 60, but again, it depends, because everybody's different. And there's, I mean, a ton of Medicaid rules we haven't even covered today, because I don't want anyone's brain to explode. So we're going to talk a little bit about Barbara if she had done some planning. So all the statistics that we, all the summary about Barbara, we're going to keep the same. But when we sat down at our meeting, Barbara decided to, yes, I'm going to do this irrevocable trust. So we transferred to the trust Barbara's house and her investments, about $125,000 of her investments into the trust. And again, she just essentially had to, we did a new deed from Barbara to Barbara as the trustee of her trust. We worked with Angela to open a new account in the name of the trust and transfer some assets. What I didn't mention earlier is that this is a grantor trust, which means any income generated by the trust is taxable to Barbara individually. It's not taxed at the higher trust tax rates. But because it's a grantor trust, Barbara transferred, even if she has highly appreciated assets and transfers them to the trust, that's not going to create a taxable event, okay? It's not, no one's gonna have to pay capital gains, it's in kind. So from a tax perspective, it's as if Barbara transferred it to herself, okay? Just sort of confusing because Medicaid doesn't see it that way, but from a tax perspective, we can kind of have our cake and eat it too.
Will the assets be stepped up if Barbara dies?
Yes, and they will get a step up in basis at Barbara's death. So we've created this trust, we've transferred those assets. Again, Barbara's income is all coming out. Her keys still work in the door. She still pays all her taxes. So from her day to day, nothing, literally once we do this, nothing changes, okay? So again, a couple of years later, Barbara calls us again, wants to make the donation to UB. It wasn't in her will. Her original trust document said, in equal shares to my daughter, that's it. We exercised Barbara's power of appointment to make the charitable gifts to UB. Because again, we sat down and we said, we know if we get through the 5-year clock that we can guarantee that these gifts get made. And that was what Barbara wanted. So again, 2 years later, the same type of thing happens. Barbara gets ill, has to go to the nursing home. At this point, the kids have already started taking over as trustee because Barbara's been unable to manage it. And so she's stepped down as trustee. Her kids have stepped up. They're working with Angela because, again, they're making sure the investments are appropriate for Barbara. When Barbara goes into the nursing home, they don't wait the 3 months. They just call Angela and say, because Angela's been meeting with them over time, they now have a relationship. They now know, I don't know what to do, but I know I can call Ange and get her. So Angela, again, brings the whole team together. And we look at doing what type of planning. Now again, remember, we've gotten through the 5-year look back, which means the trust assets are already protected. Okay, so that's $325,000 we've already protected. Okay, we've got the IRAs protected as well. So we've got another $150,000 protected there. So we have remaining cash and investments totaling $125,000. So we left that in Barbara's name. That still makes Barbara an attractive candidate to any of the nursing facilities, okay? So she has no problem getting into one of the nicer facilities. We then, again, implement a crisis plan because we still have money. So what we do is we make a gift of about $75,000 to the kids. We create about an 8-month penalty period. We make a loan of $50,000, creating, to pay over the 8 months. So at the end of the 9th month, Medicaid begins planning. At that point, we were able to protect $550,000 of Barbara's assets and ended up spending only about $50,000. So obviously for her children, that's a much better outcome. It also is a much better outcome. It meets Barbara's goals, right? She wanted to give to her kids. She wanted to give to UB, and she was able to do that. Upon her death, all of those assets pass. Some of the other benefits of this plan is the house is owned in the trust. So we don't run into that issue where we have to fire sale the house, right? We can say, kids, let's get mom situated. Let's deal with this Medicaid planning. We have investment income. We've got investments. We've got assets in the trust to pay for the household upkeep. And then we can sell the house at our leisure. I mean, again, my advice to them is generally like, let's unload this house as soon as we can, but we're not stuck in that position where it's a stress on us. And again, we get Barbara's capital gains exemption, so we're not paying any capital gains. And then what we do is we call up Angela and we say, it's great that you've been getting Barbara all this income for all these years. She loved it because she got to live her life without dipping into her principal, which, as I'm sure you all know, nobody wants to touch their principal, right? Never. So what we say, but Ange, now this money, income coming out is just going towards the cost of her care because she's on Medicaid. So we want you to shut the income off. We want you to reinvest her assets so they have more of a growth trajectory than an income trajectory. So then we're actually not taking that income out of the trust each month because it's not generating any or as much income. So we have flexibility to essentially shut off the income payments that are going to the nursing home as it relates to the investment assets. So we've really put Barbara in the best position she could be should she need the long-term care. But I'll take the example one step further. What if we did all this and Barbara never needed care? Well, okay, yeah, you set up this trust, you didn't really need it, but you're better off. You're better off having gone through this process and never ever needing it. We would consider you kind of one of the lucky ones. So that's our example in a nutshell. In a nutshell, very big nutshell. Any questions? We're open to questions.
You have a lot of competing interests between Medicaid and tax issues, correct?
There is. So again, because Medicaid and IRS and the New York State Department of Tax sort of not one unit. So they're not combined. So again, we always want to keep an eye to planning for long-term care costs, but doing so in a way that is most tax advantageous. A lot of times it's better off for us to say, look, if we have to pay a little bit extra tax, that's better off because the tax we paid is far less than the $10,000 a month in long-term care costs we were paying. But again, we look at that, and that's why it's really important to have a team approach because, I know a lot about taxes and I know a lot about investments, but I'm by no means a professional because I just don't have time to be. So that's why it's important to work with the advisors, to work with the accountants to say, how can we do this that we're getting the best tax benefit, we're getting the best benefits from Medicaid to get our costs paid for, and we're setting up the next generation, to excel from that.
We try to be cognizant of everything.
Yeah, so it's a lot of competing interests you have to think about. Particularly when you're doing all kinds of planning, you have to make sure that you're doing it, in a smart way, and that's why we find it's not good to do things piecemeal, because then you're not looking at the bigger picture.
So with one of them that doesn't have long-term care insurance and has had some falling and some fractures, looking now at assisted living, had gotten a senior advocate card from the neurologist who had said that to get into assisted living, they only do a 1 month look back. Is that correct?
For assisted living, well, assisted living is different. So some assisted living do take Medicaid, but it's not the type of Medicaid we're talking about is long-term care. Medicaid is a very big program and it has a lot of different programs within it. So to get community Medicaid or to get Medicaid in the community for health insurance, you're right, you don't have the 60-month look back. That's really unique to skilled care Medicaid. So there is, right, a limited look back if you're going into assisted living. Medicaid is not going to pay for assisted living.
Is
because
typically private pay, is that?
It is. And I should take that back. There are a few facilities with a few beds that do have, they're called ALP beds or ALP beds, that do have Medicaid payment, but they're generally very hard to come by. So you can be on Medicaid and in assisted living, but Medicaid's not going to pay the room and board, which is really the costly part of it. But assisted living is about $3,500 a month, so it's much less expensive. The issue becomes if you're giving away assets because you have no look back and you have no penalty, you always have to be cognizant of the fact that what if this assisted living isn't the last stop for this person? What if their condition worsens and they need skilled care? We have to make sure that that gift isn't going to hurt us at the next phase, that we can either undo what we've done or we've done it in a smart way that we can accomplish whatever goals that we have to plan for the worst, hope for the best in those types of circumstances.
Because assisted living is just, it's a next step, but that doesn't stop your 5-year clock.
And if the $14,550 is their liquid assets, to go into assisted living, what happens to the amount overage? I mean,
Well,
it's minimal, but.
Right, but again, assisted living, a lot of times, because they're private pay institutions, they want to see people with more assets that can show that they can pay for a certain period of time. So I think that's the problem I could potentially see running into is them saying, a lot of the facilities I've worked with want somebody to show the ability to pay for 2 years. So we can certainly talk about that if you want to come up afterwards. I know I put your question off.
That's right. If you're in assisted living and you've gone in as a private pay and you run out of finances,
Does Medicaid, where do you go down?
Well, a lot of assisted living facilities that I've worked with, and I think Angela would agree, that they have essentially, they say, we want you to be able to private pay for 2 years. After 2 years, if you run through all of your resources, we will essentially take your income, we'll help you apply for sort of an enhanced SSI benefit, so you'll have an additional income coming from the federal government, and we'll just agree to accept that. We won't charge you the full rate. The idea being, from a business perspective, they can't say, we'll take you in, take all your money, and then we're going to kick you out on the street. Of course, then who would ever want to go there? So that's generally the policy at most assisted living facilities, is they have that, if you make it 2 years and you run out of money, we're not going to kick you out. And I think they have 2 years because the odds are that someone's going to spend much longer than 2 years in assisted living, or slim to none for a lot of people.
And everyone's different. I've been to a variety of them. Some of them look for bulk upfront cashes of sums of money, anywhere between $60,000 to $100,000. Goes in, it goes into account, or it's titled to them. And if something were to happen to you, or you were to leave, you get it back as long as you're paying your monthly payments. Like, everyone is different, and they each kind of have their own little caveat as to how you can pay.
So it's certainly worthwhile looking around at various programs. I'm going to take her, then I'll get you.
Someone has been in skilled nursing. They get pneumonia. They have to go to the hospital. So 2 scenarios. One, they're private pay. The other, they're on Medicaid. Is that one of those instances where then Medicaid says, okay, unless you can find a way to pay for the bed here, now you have to go find someplace else?
So that can run into an issue if there's it's called a bed hold. So if someone leaves the nursing home, goes into the hospital for a couple of days, if they're private pay, there's essentially a bed hold fee to say, we're not going to give your bed to somebody else, but you have to pay us. So essentially, when I have clients that do that, I say, always pay the bed hold, because what happens is if you are somebody, again, if you're paying your bill and your bill is current, it's less of an issue because they want you back, you're already there, it's easier for them, right? But if you're a person who has an unpaid bill, for example, if you're the person who gave away $100,000, applied for Medicaid, $100,000 4 years ago, applied for Medicaid, the nursing home has no one to go after for this money, they're going to eat that bill. If you, in your month 2 into your penalty period and you get kicked out and you have to go to the hospital and nobody pays your bed hold, they're not going to take you back. And then you're in the scenario that Angela said, you need to find a bed somewhere else. No one's going to want to take somebody who can't pay and is getting no Medicaid. So again, then you're going to end up, places you don't want to be. So you run into a circumstance, you just pay the bed hold. Because
And so the kids pay the bed hold out of their own money, because if the person has no assets.
Well, generally when we're doing this, remember a person, in my examples, I always zeroed out to 0 just because it's easier for me to do that kind of math in my head. But in most cases, you're doing the application when someone has $14,000. For me, I keep $14,000 in the applicant's account. So they've got that money there. So the applicant can pay the bed hold. And frankly, if the applicant has no money, and we're in the circumstance that I just explained, that we have a potential where the facility doesn't want you back, then it is worth the $100 out of the kid's pocket to pay the bed hold, rather than the hassle and the stress that's going to be caused by trying to get this person placed somewhere else. And it's likely, like Angela said, going to be very far away, and it's not going to be a nice place.
It's not easy to get somebody back in. My grandfather, back in the day, I love my stories, right? They used to sell this insurance where if he went to the hospital, he would get paid. Great. I love my grandpa, he's a crazy dude. So he would rather go to the hospital when he wasn't feeling well versus a nursing home. Well, then it would get to a point where he'd have to go to the nursing home, and then he would want to go home, make a big stink, he's got to go home, right? And then he's back into the hospital. And then we're back again trying to find another location. So it's super trying. And I was 25 helping my mom do this. It is extremely, extremely trying. So you need to take a home equity line of credit, something that your kids can do something, because it's going to save their sanity, and really it's going to try to help your care for